Welcome to Theory of Change. My name is Benjamin Ulrich. I welcome you to another episode where we talk to change makers about impact and how to look at the world through the lens of capital. Today, we're going to talk about VC, the history of VC, and especially how family offices can get into VC. We're going to interview Silicon Valley family office and dear friend Alicia Castillo Holley. And I will just briefly read our disclaimer here. The information provided is intended solely for educational and informational purposes. It does not constitute legal, financial, investment, tax, or professional advice of any kind. Any opinions expressed are general in nature and are not tailored to the specific circumstances of any individual or entity. Before making any decisions based on this information, you should conduct your own due diligence and consult with a qualified professional advisor. We're going to have a great conversation with Alicia. And before we get into, I want to do a quick shout out for our sponsor, some dear friend of mine who is supporting me in ramping up this podcast, David Clark from Integris Aviation. David helps busy parents add 30 to 40 more nights per year to their family balance sheet, making sure that you build your business not at the exclusion of family time, which is the most important time, especially for those early years, bonding with your children, being there for their rehearsals, for their piano lessons, whatever it may be. And David helps you going to a meeting and then being back on time, all through the vehicle of private aviation. You will find in the show notes how to contact David, and if you want to use private aviation as a tool to building truly this multi-generational perspective, then please reach out to David. I'm sure he's going to be fantastic with you. And with that being said, let's dive into our conversation of today. I'm super excited. Let's get the ball rolling. Cameraman, rolling.
You have to have those 3, 2, 1.
I have to have
That
something.
would be so good. Yeah. And then you put past, present, future. Bang! The theory of change. That's where it is.
I still need an intro, so maybe I can work that in.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I made like 18 intros for mine.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So we're already in the middle of our conversation with the great Alicia Castillo Holley, and we're going to have a bright conversation about VC. And we discussed that we're going to have a conversation. So if you're a family office, you're an LP, you're maybe a next gen, rising gen, and you're sitting on the fence and you want to learn about VC, Alicia, you're going to take us through a journey here. And I learned about you through a very dear friend whom you interviewed on your podcast. And I reached out to you and we had such a magnificent personal conversation. We met in Davos about, let's say, a month ago. And you talked to me about your understanding of VC, your understanding of human relationships. You're a former professor, if I can say. You very educated. You started your own family office. You're investing in VC. You're an LP in many funds as well. So there's a lot to unpack, but we're going to start really from a broad macro perspective. And I couldn't be more humbled and honored to be speaking to you and learning about VC from you. And so I'll pass it over to you and would love for you to bring our listeners on board and up to speed on who you are and what you've done so far?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? Because I was going to start with the history of VC, but you just asked me a personal question, so I'm going to start with the history of VC. And in the U.S., which is a very self-referred, it's a country that does a lot of self reflection. In the U.S., the VC industry started during the Cold War, where we had the soldiers coming back, and there was no jobs for them. So three guys, a professor of MIT, professor at Harvard, and a banker got together and said, we're going to have to create new companies, but we don't know what the companies are going to be. So they shop around all the very wealthy families. There was no concept of family office, although family offices have always existed. There's a dynasty, and there's always been there. And they got together, and they eventually got seven family offices that put $1 million. But the trick was twofold. One is that they convinced them, give us the money. We don't know what to do. We're going to invent something that is going to create a lot of jobs, but we want to take 30% of all the profits. Before that, family offices used to invest in pioneers directly. So that's what we funded the discovery of America. It's people that thought there's a crazy guy, and there's, it's credited to Christopher Columbus, but the truth is that there were Vikings here exploring. They were the big pioneers and explorers, and there was a crazy guy, and the queen gave up her jewels to fund these things, not knowing what to do, not knowing what was going to be expected, and that is the true essence of entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship comes from the French word pioneer, and a pioneer doesn't know what is going to happen. So it builds the journey as it goes along. But in order to do that, he or she or they need resources. And that's where venture capital comes in. It's not a speculation, uh, capital that supports the creation of something that didn't exist before. That's the essence of venture capital. Now, these three guys were very, very fortunate because they invested in DEC, and DEC became, to today's numbers, would be a unicorn. It created a massive amount of wealth, like thousands of percentage of returns, and it got everybody excited. But that was in Boston. And what happened in Silicon Valley, where I need, was completely different. What happened here was there was this company called HP that started in New York. New York is very cold. California has good weather. And these two guys, Hewlett and Packard, came here. Actually, Packard is from Lakewood. By coincidence, when I was 16, I was an exchange student, and I lived in Lakewood. And there's a big mansion overlooking the lake that is the Packard's house. But, I didn't connect those dots until I was here. But then what happened was that these two guys moved here because of the weather. Silicon Valley has great weather. I mean, we were just talking about my garden. I'll show you my garden after that. It's just gorgeous, gorgeous weather. And so these guys came here and said, instead of spending 3 months under snow in upstate New York, they came here and they said, we're going to establish a shop there. And then they created a company, and somebody else did another software company before, when we had the mainframes, when the computing power was starting to take over business before personal computers. And what happened is that company went busted. But the scientists that work in that company didn't want to return to wherever they were, because they had the beach, they can go skiing. It's
Yeah.
2 hours to Lake Tahoe or to Tahoe, which is very beautiful, and it's an hour to Santa Cruz or Half Moon Bay with beautiful beaches. Well, beautiful beaches to California standard. I come from the Caribbean, so no. That you have to put things in the context. But the truth is that the summers are not very cold, and the summers are not very hot. The winters are not very cold, so they stay here. They started forming companies, and that created the Silicon Valley ecosystem, which is very, very collaborative, and we don't really mind if somebody fails. That is the essence of venture capital. And because you couldn't start a company without a little bit of resources, not capital, just resources, then a lot of these guys, mostly guys, software engineers that were here, they were starting companies, and then you start a software company, you need the hardware to do that, and then you need the marketing, then the sales. So it just created a culture of innovation and the can-do attitude, but also the risk takers. because they were creating something that didn't exist before. So it's like the pioneers. And in order to do that, you cannot do that alone. We need a tribe. So they were helping each other. And some were successful, some were not successful. But if they fail, there was enough support in the community to say, okay, why don't you start something else? Come and work with me for a while. And then you start something else, or let me help you. And because there was a lot of money to be made, and that a lot of money that actually got made, then they started investing. And then at the same time, Stanford University started, which is, Stanford University was a farm. It's the largest campus in the US. It's beautiful, but it it doesn't have the history that the universities have in Europe, for example, or in other ancient cultures in Egypt, China, Korea, Japan. So, but it's new, but it's the largest campus. But what happened was that they started forming engineers in computer science, and then these people needed to recruit talent, and they came, and then they realized they had a different model. So if you go to the traditional universities, they finance knowledge for the purity of knowledge and to create this massive amount of people that could be employed. There was not jobs here because this was a rural community of farmers, so they were just creating the jobs. So the only way these all of this could work is that if industry could tell the universities, oh, we need somebody to work on this. And then they would create the courses. And then they would create the courses with the people that were working in the companies. Because if you think about it, computer software or IT didn't exist 50 years ago. So we didn't have computers. We didn't have computers for everybody. So that is sort of the story of how it has evolved. I moved to Silicon Valley 12 years ago. I was living in Perth, Australia, and I was working in Aarhus, Denmark, and I always stopped here. And I was always in love, not just with the weather, but with innovation, because I like innovation and I'm a scientist by training. So, if I may, I can go back now to how that fits with my personal story. So, I grew up in Venezuela. Uh, Parents were educators. My dad was a professor, my mom was a teacher. Very romantic about knowledge and very romantic about money. My parents were socialists. We had a farm. We lost the farm, and my dad said, "Money is a source of evil." Very smart guy, very kind people, and I have one of those magical childhoods like Isabel Allende. Right. I mean, here we are, a very highly educated family, speaking several languages in a little town in Venezuela, hiking barefooted. My dad, I remember vividly, my dad got upset at the electrical company, which was a public company, by the way. And he said, I am going to live without electricity. But we live in a house without electricity, without hot water. But it's a tropic. So, it was just this very weird, very unique environment where I grew up. And probably certainly from all of my siblings, were five, I was always drawn to science. Always, always. I did my experiments. My dad had a huge library. I read all the books by the time I was 11. My parents didn't know what to do with me. And when I was 12, my parents decided that I could go to the university with my dad and work with somebody as a research assistant. So I started working. My first job was on evaluating how the peanuts plants, all the measurements of peanut plants. The peanuts are buried and they grow in the soil. So I had to shake them. I had rooms full of plants in boxes, in bags, and I had to measure all different things. And because I'm 12 and I'm curious, I started measuring different things like uh, what is the length of the first leaf. And actually, that was one thing that was correlated to yield. What just a lot of things. And then I developed not only a passion for science, but I developed a passion for data. And I like math, and I went that route for years. So I was a professor for 15 years. And living and growing up in Venezuela before Chavez was very interesting because we had, we call it the Saudi Venezuela. We had a lot of money from oil, and that a lot of that money was spent on education. The education was free. And I became a professor. I presented my first research paper when I was 15. It was studying viruses. I never really worked with my dad because there was a conflict, but everybody knew me, and everybody knew me, this little kid that came and did the work with Miriana, with the seeds, and did the work on this. And after that, when I was a professor, one of my students called me and asked me if I could help them find a person to manage product development for a Bayer Shell joint venture. And I had a lot of students. I said, sure. I sat down with them. My boss fell in love with me, but not in a romantic way. He said by then I was setting up the organic agriculture. I'm an agronomist. That's why I had a great garden too. It's cheating because I've studied that. And eventually, over the course of several months, he kept telling me, why don't you come and work with us? And I said, I know nothing about money and I don't like industry. And eventually my boss told me, Professor Castillo, you know nothing about business. And businesses is how we change the world. And by then I was 30, but I had been in academia for 16 years already. And I had published papers, and I was a very, by all means, accomplished professor. And I remember, driving to my dad with my 18-year-old car that I could fix. I had a horse. It was just a different lifestyle. And my dad said, don't do it. Don't do it. You're going to sell your soul to the devil. You're going to become one of them. So I was thinking about that. And then my boss, who then became my boss, told me, he always called me Professor Castillo. I never accepted anybody to call me in the company with my first name because I was the only woman. Everybody called each other by last name. And then the first time I went to a meeting, it's, von Stepsky. It was Bayer Shell, so there's a lot of Germans and a lot of British. And Rodriguez, there was a Venezuelan guy. And then Alicia. And I went back and I said, don't put Alicia here. You put Castillo and you put Professor Castillo because I'm a professor. That also started another route of making sure that my voice is respected. And if you think about it, Alicia Castillo doesn't come across a venture capital and a founder who created a family office in the US. So I'm always very firm on that. And if there's something that we can transfer to the younger generation is make sure your name is always respected because you own it to yourself. Nobody needs to respect you. You have to build that up. So I ended up working at Bayer. My boss, he told me three things, and this is so surreal. So he told me, "We're going to make you an offer you can't refuse." And I said, "Oh, you business people." I knew it. And he said, no, really, really. And he said, we want to change the industry, change it from the inside. You're never going to change it from the outside. Come and work with us. We need good people. And then he said, we're gonna pay you 7 times your salary. I was a professor at a public university. Salaries are public. And when he said that, I said, you think you're going to buy us with money? And he said, no, I don't. But you don't know what it is to work with resources. So I'm going to give you the best salary that I can probably give anybody that joins the company in your position. And then I said, but I can't leave the university. It's my world. And he said, and we know that. We're going to give you 1 day a week so you can go to the university. And the university doesn't have to pay you because the universities never have any money. But you can do your research. You can continue teaching, but just one day a week. So I went back and I thought about it I said, I need to think about it. I thought about it for a week. And then I asked for a year of leave of absence to the university. And this is what happened. I joined Bayer. I created the Committee for the Safe Use of Pesticides. I completely reformulated the way we train farmers. My boss used to tell me every time I opened my mouth, Bayer shares drop. And I said, why? Because I said, we're selling things that kill. You need to be careful. But we changed the law on pesticides. We made it more useful to farmers, and we took more care of the land. And then I continued working there. And then I realized that money can be a tool. And my perception growing up was that money was a tool for oppression. And my perception now is that money is a tool for progress. And that completely changed my life. And that is the thesis that I have. And then I created a model called Wealthing, which is not about getting rich, it's about creating wealth. We don't do what is called impact investing. What we see is every company that we invest in has a multiplier impact that benefits the whole society in ways that society needs, but we don't personally or as investors, we don't benefit. And actually, the founders don't benefit as well. But I have a very, very unique approach to money. Then 5 years after I joined Bayer, I took a self-funded sabbatical and I worked for the Opera House because I like operas. And then Venezuela had the first crisis in 60% of the money in the banks disappeared overnight. And then I had to make a decision. I was already going to do an MBA because I didn't know anything about business, like my boss said. And I went to Babson, which is number one in entrepreneurship, but I had to make a decision. And I ended up arriving at Babson with 2 kids, 2 boxes, 2 suitcases, and $600. And I said, I'm going to do this. So the realization that you can marshal resources without owning them, I learned through my childhood and my teenagehood and through going to college. I funded my college. I always got scholarships, but I have to pay my living expenses. And learning to balance that respect for money and the use for money as a tool for progress. And I've dedicated my life to doing that.
Please continue. So fascinating.
So what? Okay, please continue. So here I am in Silicon Valley after living in 9 countries. My kids, my poor kids, we were always moving, and they still talk to me, and we have a great relationship. My son works with me, and I continue to invest and build companies, and I sell companies, and then I said, I am going to invest in scientists. I did a program called For Brain to Gain, and I studied why very, very smart people have a very hard time being an entrepreneur, why entrepreneurs are usually called dropouts, and what makes a company grow and have this massive amount of wealth shared by the community. So you create jobs, you create services and products, you pay taxes, you create whole tribes and communities. And I did something with that for several years. I became a speaker for several years. And as I mentioned, I was living in Perth, and I decided to do a PhD in finance to really nail down how finance works. So my PhD is in finance, financing entrepreneurial ventures from academic life science research. PhDs are very, very narrow. So it's like a nanometer of width, but a kilometer of depth. And I was always coming here, and at some point I said, I'm going to move to Silicon Valley because I want to change education. So I moved here to create a university, and that didn't work. But so by then, I'm a senior person. I have made enough money. I can do whatever I want. And on the side, I joined St. Hill Angels. St. Hill Angels at that time was the largest angel group. It's a fantastic organization, fascinating experience. I was there for 7 years. I was the co-chair of life science because, of course, being a scientist in biology, I studied genetics and genes, that gives you a very specific perspective. And then the other area that I really like is physics, because I like physics. So I like energy, I like climate, I like space, I like anything that is hardware. And so this was a great base for me. And I continue investing. So I was at 10 Hill Angels, I continue investing. I became a member of the board. But there were a lot of people that didn't want to come and be investors. I also invested in several VCs. So I'm an investor in 13 VCs, and I have my own VC. But one of the things that I do all the time is I'm always looking for progress, and I'm very skeptical about what is happening. And a lot of people get sort of upset about that. But the truth is that science, the goal of science is to prove that you're wrong, not to prove that you're right. And that is why we have a ton of scientists that cannot be good entrepreneurs. Because you can imagine, to be a good scientist, you have to doubt yourself. Can you imagine going to raise money and say, well, it might work, but it might not work, but we're going to continue doing this? And when I was doing my PhD, I was talking to some of them. One of the jokes was, "You're working very, very hard on this solution to find, the diagnostic and the cancer treatment, and then you're working on that, and you're very involved. And somebody says, hey, this might work for space computing." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's so exciting! Let's go and research that." So that is a true scientist. That's why scientists are bad founders, because it's not their attention span, is that their whole role of science is to prove that you're wrong. You can't do entrepreneurship with that. And so anyway, so I'm always proving that I'm wrong. It drives my team crazy. I said, why don't we do it this way? Maybe we can do it this way. So I did. So after 7 years at Sandhill, I said, a lot of people wanted to invest with me, but they did not want to invest in, they did not want to join an angel group. So I created an investment club. The investment club is doing fantastic. March is going to be our 6th-year anniversary. We have 5 unicorns, but don't get me wrong, unicorns never make any money. It's just vanity, but that's the truth. And we have made 64 investments in several companies, but I changed the model. So I changed the model completely, because people want to invest. And if you go solo, like I did for many, many years, you just don't have enough. You don't have enough time. You don't have enough money. You don't have enough resources. And it's like working all your life with just one kid. Well, for the people that don't have kids, let me say, it's just working. It's like, I'm an agronomist, so it's like working all your life for one plant. But you need a community around it, especially at early stages. So there's an option called SPVs. I didn't like SPVs. I'm a people's person. I don't like just for transactions. I like to know the people behind. I need to understand, what do you want to do with your money? Do you like chocolate, or do you tea, coffee, whiskey? Do you like to dance? Do you have family? Do you like gardening? I don't know. I want to connect at a personal level, and SPVs don't allow me to do that. And VCs don't allow us to do that. And that's where I'm getting into the VC, because we continue to grow at the club. I decided to start a VC, a fund that takes care of the pro rata rights. So it's like the overflow of the companies go to the VC. But then I realized that the biggest tragedy of venture capital is we don't allow, limited partners are limited. We don't allow them to participate. And we don't allow them to participate because they don't know how to invest in venture capital. They know how to run companies, but they don't know how to be good investors. But by doing that, what happened is we put a lot of pressure in just the general partner, and nobody benefits from that. So now I am transforming venture capital to allow family offices, specifically family offices that have some advantages, to participate in the wealth created by their investments, and not to participate by owning the companies, but by supporting the companies with the same tools that good investors do, and by continuing to create a different model, because venture capital doesn't work anymore. And I say that also because not only because I studied that, but because I practice that. I'm in limited partners in 13 VCs, in 6 of them that are huge VCs, that I'm talking about, $400 to $800 million VCs. I don't get any information. So the information that I can get is the information that anybody can get on the press. And I don't know what the companies are doing, but it's a big waste, because I know a ton of people, because I have a portfolio that can progress together, because I can say, hey, you need a fractional CFO. Let's find a fractional CFO for these 5 companies in the same industry and share that. Or, I need a space to create a new software, or to create a database. Now it's very popular. Or even have the researchers in cells and cancer use some of that knowledge to help create the new models for energy that we need. the new nuclear models, the semiconductors that can help, that can learn from the films that we develop for cataracts. So those are the things, this cross-pollination or pollination, those are the things that VCs can't do. And these are the things that an investment club can do with family offices. But we need to learn to work together. And that's where I'm very excited to see the newer generations, because the newer generations, in my opinion, are the ones that are excited about the change, because they don't have the baggage, and they can act like the innovators within their family offices. So that is the whole circle. And then when I learned that 2 years ago, I get invited to a lot of family office events. So 2 years ago, one of the one of my friends, uh, who has a family office, who is seventh generation family office, told me, "Why don't you create a family office?" I said, "I don't know how to do that." And then he said, rightly so, I said, "When not knowing has stopped you from doing it?" I said, "Oh, never. Well, I don't know." I said, "I think about my dad." And so we went on vacation. So my kids, I think you know that my kids and their families and we go on vacations every year. That's my gift. I don't give material gifts. I give experiences. And so I was telling them, we're having dinner with all the grandkids there. I was telling them, I'm thinking about doing a family office. And there's all these jokes with my son and his wife and my daughter and my son-in-law. And they're like, yes, yes, I want these. We went looking for castles last year in France. That we need to have a space, and they live in different parts of the world. And it was really, really hilarious. And I said, okay, we need to settle. We need to see what are the values. So we set the values, and everybody participated. And the little grandkid, Toto, Anthony, or Toto, he was, I think, 6 at the time. And he said, "What are values?" So I said, "Well, you ask your cousins, and values is something that guides you, that you love and you would do regardless." That's that's one of the granddaughters said that. And then he said, "I have one, chocolate." So now chocolate is a value, dancing is a value, uncertainty is a value. We're comfortable with uncertainty, respect. I mean, we have all these things. And we created a picture with all the values of the family. We didn't have to compromise. We just said, these are going to be the values of the family. And now we have a family office, which has changed my mind, because now the wealth that I create is not related to me, it's generational. But I want to instill this philosophy of creating wealth, of wealthing. I want to create a philosophy of using money as a source of progress, using money to enjoy ourselves, but always having that thought that we have been so privileged to have this pocket of money, um, and connect dots and support people, founders that respect money, and they work very, very hard, but they don't want to be given something except a choice.
So I'm intrigued. Talk, I would like you to talk about the cross pollination a little bit more and how to unlimit the limited partners. And then, if we have time, I would like to talk about the using money as a force for good and within the context of your family, because I know you have children, and especially uh, if we look at the multi-generational historical aspect of you being a wealth creator and then you teaching that to your children, what's your philosophy on that? How are you talking to your children? And not just within the broad, the narrow limit of your family, but within your philosophy of a new model of VC. And then, yeah, like if you were at a conference and you gave a 5-minute keynote, what would that be? I'd love to hear that.
So thank you for that. I think my intention is to provide the thought that limited partners don't work. And then we start thinking about what do we need to do. See, we have to remember that there was a period where we thought that the world was flat and everybody They don't question it. So now what I want to do is I want to question venture capital. And I want more family offices to say, how can we work to disrupt venture capital so it is useful? And some of the limitations of venture capital is not only lack of information. We have structural changes. A VC fund is 10 years, maybe 1 or 2 years extension, but it's 10 years. In 10 years, a lot of things can happen. And when you change, when you need to exit at year 10, might not be a good opportunity. But the law forces you to do that. We need to start having venture capital funds move into a more flexible model. So what people are doing now is having secondaries. People need their liquidity. So we need to go back and understand the problem to solve it. So they say, well, we don't have liquidity. It's a VC has 10 years, up to 13 years, and the company needs 17 years to go public or to exit or to be acquired. Then how do we manage that? And what we manage here in Silicon Valley is that you have 3 or 4 years of angel investors. You don't have that anywhere else. So angel investors here do the hard work of shaping the company, but they leave or they get kicked out. They don't leave, they don't get bought out. That is another thing, because I have companies that I don't know if I'm ever going to make money. I mean, there's a company that is 17 years old I invested in. I don't know if I'm going to get that money out. And I need to get my money out to continue to invest in, but I also want a return. So I think the biggest step now is to say venture capital needs to change. That is the first step. So the world is not flat. That is the first step. And then the second step is, how do we get together so we can collaborate to create a new model? Because we're not creating the model in isolation. And that is a challenge with family offices, that family offices only look downwards. And that I see all the time. So it's how do I protect my assets, my generational wealth, not how do I use that to make the world better. And by our need to do good, the need that we have once we are established to do good, we go into philanthropy. Philanthropy has turned into an ego-driven, tax-driven exercise. Venture capital can merge the need to create something, to support something new, but it also can create innovation for the family office. And you don't have to be a family office member to work in a platform company. And you can create a lot of money for that family office. Family offices, especially if they're operators, they know what the market needs, and they can reduce the risk of failure by telling the founders, this is not the way. We already tried that. Or telling them very important things. Like I was talking to a company the other day, and the company needs to have 200,000 satellites in orbit to work. And then I said, well, those satellites are not going to work. Let's see who can make a little one, because they used to be like a car, and now they can be like a box. So we found that company, and that company doesn't have a market because it doesn't have the technology. Now this company has the technology, doesn't have the supplier. And now we think, okay, where are going to manufacture that? And then now we see who's going to supply the metals and who's going to create the infrastructure. Those are all things that family offices can do. Family office can go and say, okay, we're going to do this, and then on the side we're going to do this extra layer. And I'm going to take it one step further to a family office that is in construction in Austria. And the guy that manages the corporate VC, he is such a wise guy. He's so young and so wise. And he was telling me, we invest in companies that can change the way we build, that can change the way we embed things that we need in buildings, like energy and plumbing and those things. But also, we invest in companies that can create a tribal structure and support the social mesh of the towns where we create the supplies, because the things that they move are very big and heavy and expensive. So they don't go to the big cities to do that. They are outside, and they want to make sure that those communities have a healthy community. Now, talk about innovation and talk about that purpose-driven approach to venture capital. And they're not doing that because a donation. They're doing that. We have the test models, and we have our intention is we can make money on that, but we can unleash a lot of wealth so these communities can stay and the kids don't have to leave for the big cities and all that. That vision, that of very, very complex thoughts and bringing it together, it's the vision that we need in venture capital. That is the vision. But that is a family office that is state private and has their own corporate VC because they have offices everywhere around the world. How do we cross-pollinate? It's a matter of using innovation within innovation. So we had, and I'll give you an example, and you have to have that intention of saying, how do we marshal resources, which is very entrepreneurial. And scientists do it all the time because they never have money, unless you work at a big corporation. But you say, so we had a company that was doing something with plants and the genes around the nucleus. So it's not the RNA, it's not the genes inside. So you don't do genetic modification. Very, very interesting technology. And they flare and the plants talk. The plants tell you with signals, I'm thirsty, I have a disease, the soil is too salty, which is a big problem because once we see the impact of salt in the soil, you cannot recover that. But the plants know, the plants would tell you that. So they do all of this, and they coat the seed, which is very easy to do. But then one of our members, one of our investors, who has a family office, who has a farm, told me, I would love to see how this works with Caterpillar. And because he sold his company to Caterpillar. So we started talking and they said, well, you need the seed. You need who's going to sell the seed. You need to evaluate the response of the seed, which is through fluorescence. But they use satellites. And I said, what about drones? And I said, we can't use drones because the drones bump into each other. So we cannot display drones. And then you have the drone company said, well, we can't do this because we need a special lens. So this is what we did. We had 5 companies in our portfolio. We sent a note to all of them, but because I'm an agronomist, I could say, hey, let's do this. But we had 5 different companies. We had the seed company. We had a company that did a lens for cars, that does a lens for cars so they can see people in very low density visual situations. An example, 3 a.m. snowing. So automotive and trucks, they have cameras, but at 3 a.m. snowing is not the most common optical sensor. So they create the cameras and the lens, and they're tiny, they're the size of my pinky nail. They created cameras for the cars. But there's a drone company that has the software to expand vision from satellites to drones with those drones, they can be 1 kilometer high and they can check up to a centimeter. And they're using ports, and because in ports, for example, you have a port and you have a safety issue and something is starting to lean, by the time they can balance that back, it could be too late. So they can do those things. It's a drone company. So they have the software. Then we have another drone company that does anti-collision. And literally the anti-collision started using the lens of the cars because we put them in touch. And now we have those 4 companies. And then we have another company that is doing micro droplets. So if you have a pest, the pest in the field are very located because the moms put the eggs together. That's how it works. They don't go flying one plant at a time. So we had 5 companies getting together and doing what we call innovation stacking. So one innovation, other innovation, another innovation, another innovation, and they got a project together. Most VCs don't do that, and most family offices don't know how to do that. So family offices are trying to get into venture capital without knowing how to invest with other people and invest in a way that they're like the grandmas, or they're not hiring a company, they're supporting the company. So that's why family offices have a hard time with venture capital. And the other thing is that is you need to see a path to liquidity. And usually when you do wealth management, you think about protecting your assets. You don't think about investing in a way that transforms the world. So those are things like that. Did I answer your question?
I would like to. I'm sure there is. Everybody can pick their answer from what you were saying, because, yeah. Uh, can we add a little bit on liquidity? I think it's important. And you mentioned the wealth manager, the asset manager, who is who who looks at returns and protecting the assets, as in, we need to keep the principal alive. Like Warren Buffett said, number one rule is don't lose money, and rule number two is don't forget rule number one. And one of the questions I had was like, what if a family had invested in VC before and got burned because the fund blew up, the companies, went bankrupt and folded, whatever the term is. You need to IPO. You need to sell to a strategic, a big pharma company. I was talking to Peter Fusaro, and he said that the big oil companies like Shell, they don't incubate technologies. They wait, and then they buy the technologies, and then they implement them worldwide. There needs to be this period where the VC finds the little babies, the seeds, he germinates the seeds. He waits until they're like this. He starts putting them in sand. Then when they are like this, he puts them in soil. Then when they're a little bit bigger, he can put them in a greenhouse. And then maybe at some point he can put them outside in a garden. And then maybe he can sell them to a park or a house owner garden, a city. And then you have a tree or a forest. So, what do family offices, their chief investment officers, need to understand about liquidity and exiting when thinking about VC? Because they want to do good, choosing a VC, how to talk to the VC, what questions should they ask themselves first about their risk tolerance, and then what questions should they ask the GP, and then how can they get themselves involved, especially if they're operators and they have a huge network and they just want to continue doing good stuff, right?
So the first thing is find somebody else to discuss this with. So don't go solo. I mean, I started 18 companies. I had to close 5, and I had such a bad luck with some of my co-founders that I decided I'm going to do this solo until I came here, and I learned we need to establish rules for collaboration, and that is much more powerful. So that has been a learning for me, to understand how we support each other and how do we ask questions for continuous improvement. So probably that is the first thing. I have a group now. We're investing in nuclear energy. We're exploring investing in nuclear energy, and there's like 6 or 8 groups, and we're sharing what we see. And we're all going to invest separately or together. We don't know, but we're sharing what we see, because the only way we can progress in certain industries is to collaborate. And my vision is helping somebody else's vision, somebody else's vision, somebody else's vision. So that is the first thing, is create a group. In terms of wealth management, here's the thing. You cannot risk what you cannot lose. So set up a bucket that you can invest, and don't get upset if you lose that bucket. But set up a bucket that you can lose. For years in May, I ran a webinar about venture capital as an asset class, because I invest in many, many things. I have 2 houses, I have a hotel, I invest in art, I had a luxury car. So I invest in many, and I have, of course, I have in the stock market, commodities. I invest in a whole bunch of things. But I started with 5% of my asset base, with saving and realizing I'm going to make a lot of money 2 ways: as a founder of a company, as an investor in an early stage company. Otherwise, it's just very predictable. And it's about picking winners. My philosophy is not about picking winners. My philosophy is about making winners. So I only work with people that accept that we can work together. That's one of my personal criteria. And that is something that you can take to a family office. In terms of liquidity, what happens with liquidity? First of all, is that most of VCs don't know what they're doing. I'm so sorry to say that, but they don't know what they're doing because they never operated a company. You can operate a company, and only when you're going through a very high stressful situation, the true nature of a person comes out. So when you're in a corporation, you're always protected because there are two or three people can do the same thing, and you have the politics, the internal politics, but you're very well protected. Like when I work at Bayer, oh my gosh, we had so many resources, and our level of excellence was mind blowing. That was the best gift that Klaus, my boss, could have given me, is to join that company and to show me this is what excellence is. This is when you have money. You can hire the best photographers, so you don't have the crappy photographs that you have to develop in your own house, in your dark room, like I did. And I was like, yeah, but that's expensive. Yes, but we have the money to pay that. And there was no excuse for mediocrity. So I learned that at Bayer. And I want to keep that. But the truth is that when you're running a small company, or when you're running a company that is changing the status quo, you don't have the time and you don't have the extra resources. So you need to be very stingy with the resources, and you need to see who else has done this so I can bring them. Not so I can copy them, so I can bring them. That's how that's how Meta grew, Facebook grew into Meta, that's how Google grew, that's how Oracle grew, that's how Yahoo was the largest acquirer. So then you have to start changing your mind that you're not going to protect yourself. You're going to build this company so you can grow. It's all about creating wealth, co-creating wealth with others. So that is a change of mindset. A wealth manager is supposed to protect your resources. The wealth manager is not supposed to risk your resources. So you can't use that. You can do that for both. It doesn't work. You need different set of skills, and you need a different mindset. So you need to have a bucket of money that is going to be used for venture capital, and then you need to decide what are the constraints, what are the industries, what are the type of VCs. Are you going to go for VCs, or are you going to go for a club? I think we have the best model, and I think most people should have investment clubs, but that's what I think. But there's great VCs. I'm actually going to publish a post tomorrow about emerging VCs. There are great VCs there, but we need to help them too, because they are small, they're emerging, and we need to help them. It's not go them and then have the whip or complain about them. We need to step up and say, hey, this is a good company. What do you think? We're going to buy from that company. We're going to be a client, or we're going to be a supplier. So we need to change that. So the wealth manager is not the appropriate person to invest in venture capital. You have to have an investment committee, or you have to have somebody, or you have to hire somebody as a consultant to help you create your portfolio. We do that at the club, but you can hire somebody to do that. So we look at portfolio management, and we see you have all these companies where you have operating capacity. Let's look at how we can scout innovative companies so they can be their suppliers, or you can be your clients. You can sell to them, or you can buy from them. So you can do those two things. And then you can integrate them or not. But what happens is a family office, if it works alone, the capacity to innovate is very limited. Whereas you want to have 5, 10, 15 working together. That's exactly what a VC does. It has a lot of limited partners. Now, since 2000, VCs have returned 65% of the VCs have not even returned the capital that you gave them. And now that I'm starting to harvest the first 3 or 4 VCs where I invested, I'm not going to get my money back. I'm not going to lose it all, but I'm going to lose 40% of my capital after 13 years when I made so much money in other things. So I invested in a company that prints organs. We made 50 times our investment in 13 months. And from that technology, we invested in 2 more companies. And I helped those founders find a place to stay because they needed to be close to where the tissue was created. I mean, stupid things. If you're creating tissue and you're half away the country, you're going to have a lot of supply and logistic nightmares. So move the company so you're next door, or try to convince them to rent you a space. So you're like a minute commute. So those are the things that we need to think about waste. Then you asked me about liquidity. Here's the issue with liquidity, because venture capital is not working. People are blaming the political changes and the technology changes. Everybody's now is obsessed with AI. I think AI has what I call circularity of capital. So Google puts $1 billion in it, or Microsoft puts, I don't know, $100 million in ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is going to pay Microsoft, or it's going to combine their sales with that. So now we have inflated valuations that are not realistic, because there's no business fundamental behind that. And then they say, oh, we invested billions and billions and billions and billions. And the truth is that a lot of these rounds are reshopped. And I know that because I live here, I'm very well connected. So you have a 40 billion round of a 300, one of the big AIs had a 40 billion round open. And I got like 6 emails. Hey, do you want to invest in that? We're going to do an SPV. That's why I don't like SPVs. We're going to do an SPV. So you can put 100,000. And the question for an SPV is, say, how much of that money goes into the company? Because you have layers and layers and layers of management fees. And if you put $1 million in a company and the company multiplies in value, let's say doubles in value in 1 year, but the SPV took 50%, you didn't make any money. And that is a tragedy also, because the company doesn't have the money that it needs.
Yeah.
So venture capital has become a fee-based company. So we need to be very, very careful about that. And I don't like the big corporations, the big VCs, because they don't care. It's a bragging mechanism, and they don't care. And they only show the companies that make money. And in paper, everything looks great. We had 8 exits last year. In paper, it looks fantastic, but 2 of them are IPOs. We can exit, so we don't know how much money we make. 4 of them were acquisitions for new shares. We don't know how much money you make. And then the other 2 closed. One of them closed because of tariffs. And now the tariffs are coming back. So now I'm going to see a lot of lawsuits. And I just sent a note to that company, the liquidator, said, I don't want to get involved with that, because it's going to be a waste of my time and resources to sue the government. I mean, but you have to have that mentality of looking at the investment as a puzzle. Where do you fit into that puzzle? And then the advantages of thinking about wealth management comes in handy when you're thinking about protecting what you're investing in. But you don't protect it so it doesn't move. You protect it so you lose less. And then you act upon that. The liquidity, in my view, is a desperate intention to get some money out when there's no money to be made, or because the fund needs to close because of the regulations. And then I have an evergreen fund. I invested in evergreen. That's another nightmare. I don't recommend it. That people try to do evergreen funds. I don't recommend it. I looked at it for our fund, and I don't recommend it. So I mean, if you're in a VC, you're already committed. There's 2 rules in the US: you commit, but you don't transfer the capital unless they invest. But in Europe, you commit and you transfer the capital. So that's it. And then the other thing is that a lot of people that manage VCs are not operators. They never run a company. And the people that run companies, they do the family office, and they become direct investors. So who's going to manage the VC? What is the experience? And the experience has to be proven by, what is your capacity to execute? But if you need to wait 10 years to get results, then how old do you have to be a good VC? You have to be what, 100? So those are the things we need to change, and we need to change it all the time.
I'm processing, but it sounds like, yeah. Here's the one thing I wanted to ask you. You mentioned a club versus a fund. What's the difference between a club and a fund?
Well, I'm going to tell you my difference, because I created the club model because I was not satisfied. I just didn't know it could work for family offices. So, and anybody can start thinking about different models. But I'm going to tell you that my whole purpose of talking to you is to recognize that the world is not flat. We need to change venture capital because it's a very, very powerful tool. It is not working. So we need to go back and say, why it's not working? What can we change? What can we improve? And the people that are best prepared to do that are the family offices because they have the resources, not just the capital, they have the know-how. So they're better prepared than bankers. So that's why I'm very excited about talking in these podcasts and highlighting that venture capital is not dead; it just needs to be changed. So what I'm going to tell you what we did at the club, and I hope people can uh, be excited about that. So what we did at the club is that we look at what is the purpose of VCs, VC funds. What do VC funds do? And they do 10 things. I wrote a book about funding your company that has all the 10 steps. But VCs do 10 things. They attract and scout deals. They filter, they evaluate, then they pass them through an investment committee, then they invest, then they support, then they continue raising and helping them raise. They usually change the companies and pivot. They look for a potential acquirer or an exit, and they exit. 10 steps. So we look at that and we said, okay, let's do these steps, but let's give every member of the club the choice to invest or not. So they can choose whether to invest or not, and they can choose how much money they want to invest or not. There's a little limitation. If the round is too small, I mean, there's not enough. But that was the first thing. How can we keep the best practices of VCs with things that don't work? So one of the things that doesn't work is it doesn't work if you cannot choose your investment. The other thing, it doesn't work if you cannot add to the founders. So if you don't know the founders, which happen in VCs, so I get it. There's two or three that are good that send us the information, but some they just send me a K1. This is how we're doing. Well, okay, I would like to talk to this founder because I would like to invest, or I have somebody that can help. So that's the other one. So it's the information is not transparent. They have no clue about the financial information of the company. We have quarterly reports, and they don't have any choice. So, but then we saw two or three other things. One is the discretion, and one of the problems uh, that investors have, and I have too, and now I have a family office, is that a lot of people bombard us with, "Oh, can you invest in this company?" And I have, I don't know, 4 or 5 meetings per week on supporting other founders that I'm not going to invest. I have 8 meetings per week, but 4 or 5 are people that are referred to me by my friends, by my family, by people who said, maybe you can talk to this founder to help them. And I'm very happy to do that, considering my 8 half-an-hour slots per week, because I don't charge for that. I don't want to be a consultant to founders. Um, but the truth is, we see a lot of companies, so we know what's going on in the market, and we might be able to help. So the problem is that if you are in an angel group, everybody knows how much you're investing, who are you investing with. They know if you know or if you don't know. So we have a layer of discretion. You're a member of the club invests. We have an investment vehicle that is one for all the investments. It's a multi-class. It's just a California regulation. It doesn't exist in New York, for example. But then so that protects the member. We have members, we have some family office and some individuals. We have members who don't want to be recognized as members, so they never participate. They send us the questions, they see the recording. And so privacy is an important value besides the authenticity and the filtering. We see one deal per month, so we took care of the deal overload, but we do a deep due diligence. So we look at bank accounts, what are the contracts, what is your cap table? There's a lot of problems with cap tables. So we know how to look for that because we're trained for that. So we filter, we pick one. But then I invest in all the deals. So the only person that everybody knows how much money is investing is me. That's the only one. And everybody can decide if they don't want to invest, it doesn't matter. These are good companies, they're going to get funded. And if they want to invest, fine. And then we have one entry in the cap table. What has happened that we didn't know, that started happening 3 years ago, we're 6 years old, is that one member said, I would like to invest in this company, but they're not raising any more money. Is it possible to get in? So I look at my contracts, I look at my operating agreement, and it turns out we can. So we have our own secondaries, internal secondaries, and that's a big plus that we didn't know we have that. So what has ended up happening is that we have members who have medical needs or cash needs, and they send us a notice that we would like to sell a portion or 100% of these companies. These are my investments. Nobody knows how much money they have invested because we keep it private. But what we do is we have a newsletter. In the newsletter, we put now every month, we put now there's a member who's interested in investing in this company. There's a member who's interested in selling this company. And we have a portal, a secure portal that has all the information. We allow them to communicate, they make a decision, and all it costs us is $60 is the reporting on our CFO and our bookkeeper. But it doesn't impact the company that we invested in. VC can't do that. I have a VC. If you transfer a limited partner, it's a big nightmare. But there's no structure for that. I mean, it's not their fault. Maybe somebody would come, but when they sell secondaries, it's a huge problem. There's a group here called Liquidity Club that is trying to figure that out. But I think we have a different system, and we started investing in funds too, because sometimes you want to invest in the fund and you want to exit the fund before for whatever reason, or you want to use the losses, and you're willing to pay less, or you're willing to accept, you're willing to sell less. It's an individual decision. Um, Not all the transactions happen because you have to have two parties interested, but it has become so popular that every month we put it there. This person is interested in doing this, and this person is interested in buying this, and then we put them together. And because we have a portal, they can see that. We also have our deal flow is very robust, not because we see one new deal per month, but we continue to invest. So far we invest we make like 13 investments per year. 5 or 6 are new, and 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 are follow-ons. And so what happens is somebody might want to say, I want to see this company. Every time we have a follow-on round, we open the information from that company to everybody, so you can see what they did last year, the year before last. Do they provide the updates on time? We have invested in companies that do down rounds, and we have refused companies that do down rounds. So we have a team that filters that and says these are the best deals. But we share the information. We have a deal now that is doing a down round, and I don't think it's a good deal. But I put the information, and we don't make investment advice either. We provide information. So the club provides information, and the club provides support. But those are the things that and we will continue to do other things that I don't know what we will do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would say, in summary, to me, what I find interesting is, one, the club model with the benefits that you mentioned, and maybe less of the downsides of the fund. Although I don't know the regulation in the States, and I know very little about VC in general. But I understand that the club model is interesting. And then what I also notice is, from that club model, there needs to be someone dedicated within the family office, or as a bridge, as an interculator to the family office, with that bucket that you said, you got to put it aside. And here's the third thing that stuck with me is, VC is not, can I say it like that? It's not a vehicle to generate returns as, let's say, a hedge fund is. It is a vehicle for creating wealth, as you say, as in, let me use the term impact, like the building company in Austria that creates a community. So the new technology in with the lenses, so the seeds, so food supply, or maybe we can talk about clothing or plastic recycling or whatever it may be. I recorded a podcast, and I said I want to build waste burning facilities in areas where the piles are just filling up, and they have landfills and everything. So in a way, it is VC, but then you could think of it as an infrastructure or energy project. But having that being able to bring in a lot of complexity and yet keeping it very simple, and then working together from all different sides with all sorts of people. I think that's a great message, Professor Castillo.
I haven't heard
I
that
love
in
that. I
some
love
time.
that.
That's so funny. Yeah.
we I mean, I want to encourage all women. I want to encourage all men, because it's a very, very subtle and very important topic, talking about biases and everything. I mean, I can talk about that from my personal experiences. Here I am, a white male, but I have had my share of biases that people
Yeah.
were
Me
projecting
too.
on me, right? So good for you for standing up at buyers board meetings and everything, and
Graceful.
encouraging all our listeners to do the same. So with that being said, I'm ready to conclude this conversation. It's been a lot of interesting and things to think about and to digest, and to act upon, for sure. So what I will say is, I wanna wish you all the best, because and from a multi-generational perspective, I wish that you you have your students, you have your followership, you have the people who will continue developing these new models, and who want to think about how can we make the world round. Yeah. Because it is round. Like, so what do we need to prove that? How can
It's
we,
not round.
the Galileos and everything. So
Yeah, 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 but it's
um
not round. My friends in space would say it's not round. Every time I said it's round, it's like, okay, it's not round. Whatever.
it's an ellipse or something, right? So yeah, very good,
Well,
very
that's
good.
what we think. We don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are my concluding wishes. Best of luck, best of health for you and your
Thank you.
family. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Montreal very soon, right?
Small world. Come to
Yeah.
California.
One day, for sure, I'll pick a fruit from your lemon tree. Amazing. No, thank you for the invitation. I'd love to. Thank you for sharing your history, your rich heritage, your thoughts, the outlooks, and see you soon. Best of luck.
Thank you for having me, and I hope everybody gets excited about getting into venture capital in a different way and changing it for the benefit of everybody, not just the generational wealth.